Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I am your host, Dave Kluge, and today I am joined with Chris Meaney and Adam Pfeifer of FTN. And we are going to be talking about some ambiguous wide receiver rooms. Of course, we're going to be talking about Denver, looking at Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and how these guys are going to fare. We're going to be looking at the Los Angeles Chargers with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen going nearly back-to-back in drafts and who you should draft there. And then, of course, we have no idea who the wide receiver 2 is in Buffalo Bills, so we are going to talk about that as well. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of The Launchpad. Is Keenan Allen or Mike Williams the wide receiver that you want to draft on the Los Angeles Chargers? That and so much more coming up on today's episode of The Launchpad. Right now, Keenan Allen is getting drafted as the wide receiver 12. Mike Williams is getting drafted immediately after as the wide receiver 16. Chris Meaney, go ahead and start us off here. Between these two wide receivers at ADP, who do you prefer in fantasy football?
I think I prefer Mike Williams. I was thinking about this one a little bit. I don't think there's a wrong answer here, to be honest. I believe that, Dave, it's probably how you want to construct your team. If you're picking early in the first round and you do go with a bell cow running back, you could have Keenan Allen at the end of the second as your wide receiver 1, or if you want to get an alpha wide receiver, attack the running back position in the second, and then Mike Williams will be available to you. Adam and I are doing a mock draft currently, a bit of a slow draft over at FTN, and I believe I took Mike Williams in the 4th round. And as my first wide receiver, I went running back heavy to start that one just to experiment. But I mean, I think that they're both viable. I mean, we know that Justin Herbert can, support both. He was inside the top 6 in passing attempts. It's a very aggressive play caller there between, or in LA rather, in year number 2 here with Staley. But Keenan Allen, wide receiver 11 last year in a PPR setting. Mike Williams, wide receiver 12 in a PPR setting. One guy in Allen, more targets, more catches, maybe a little bit safer floor, and maybe not as much touchdowns. And you look at a guy like Williams, who had more yards, more touchdowns on fewer catches and fewer targets, 15.4 fantasy points per game and 15.1 yards per reception. 14 end zone targets, tied for 5th overall, 4th among wide receivers. Diggs, Jefferson, Metcalf ahead of him, actually tied with Chase and Kupp. So I don't want to be have cop-out answer here. I like both of them. I do believe, for me personally, I want to shoot for ceiling and upside. So give me Mike Williams a little bit later on in terms of cost. But I think, both of these guys are going to finish as top 20 wide receivers again this year, I do believe.
Yeah, you talk about the Mike Williams upside, and we've just never seen it over a full season. Like, we get these little stretches where it's like, all right, Mike Williams finally put it together. And like, what, this is year 6 now that he's heading into? I mean, he's finished off his rookie contract. He got the extension this year, and we keep waiting for him to put this together over a full season. This could finally be the year, and I think because of that extension, that's why he's getting drafted where he is. We saw a little taste of it early in the season last year where he just balled out. He was playing that X receiver role, getting a ton of targets, doing a lot with them, and then he got hurt and just kind of disappeared after that. But people are still drafting him very highly now that we've seen what he can do with the hopes that he can do it on a larger stage. Adam, same question to you, though. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, who do you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, right now I still have Keenan Allen ranked ahead just because of that, that safety he provides every single season with 90 to 100 catches. But yeah, I mean, like you mentioned that ceiling we saw from Mike Williams, there was a ton of hype this time last season about Mike Williams because Joe Lombardi was talking about that role he's going to have, and it came to fruition to start the year. He was like the wide receiver 1 in the first 5 weeks. He was ahead of Cooper Kupp for the first 5 weeks, barely, but he was. Then, like you said, he got hurt. And then the role kind of changed because to start the season, he was being used way more than he had been in the intermediate parts of the field. And then he went back to being more of a field stretcher, and there was way more inconsistencies. He still had a handful of spike weeks. But, like, the end zone targets are definitively his, especially if we think Austin Eckler's touchdowns are coming down this season. Like, I think if between Allen and Mike Williams, if there was a receiver that had a chance to finish top 5, it's probably Mike Williams. But if I had to guarantee one of them would finish top 12 to 15, it'd probably be Keenan Allen. So kind of like Meaney said, I think it might depend on if you go with more of a higher upside but riskier start to your draft. Maybe you side with Keenan Allen in the 3rd or 2nd round or whatever. But yeah, like this time last year, I was so excited about the upside Mike Williams possessed, and now, like you said, we've seen it again in a smaller sample. But nothing's changed, right? Like, the offense is still the same. It's still Joe Lombardi's offense. They didn't add anybody on offense. Like, all the additions they made were on defense. Yes, maybe Josh Palmer takes another step forward this season, but, like, this is going to be Mike Williams not only leading the team in targets in the end zone, but, like, he could lead the league in end zone targets potentially. So I'm really starting to come around on just pushing Mike Evans ahead of Keenan Allen, but I can't do it yet. I don't know. Keenan Allen's, and then I see the route Keenan Allen had in practice, even though he does that every single week, and it's like, okay, yeah, Keenan Allen's he's still insanely good, but they're both really good. So
yeah, they're both fantastic.
The conversation with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen almost kind of feels like the Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey. Like, who are you taking at the 101? Like, if you're swinging for the pure upside, Mike Williams is a guy. Like, he's got it in his range of outcomes where he could be the best fantasy football wide receiver, but he's also got a floor where he could potentially finish outside of the top 40. I mean, we've seen it time and time again where this guy has the talent, but just hasn't been able to put together a full season. With Keenan Allen, I mean, it's almost impossible that this guy finishes outside of like the top 18 or 20 wide receivers. You know what you're getting with Keenan Allen, but like you said, the upside is limited. Like, he's probably not going to crack into the top 5. So I think you guys made the point, but it just makes so much sense that kind of it depends on who you draft early. If you need the upside, Williams is the guy, and if you're looking for something a little bit safer, Keenan Allen's the guy. So I like talking about these two because they are so much fun. And then Josh Palmer is just the forgotten guy here who has been tearing up camp so far, and we're hoping for big things out of him. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning into episode 40 of the Launchpad. Chris and Adam, I just have to thank you guys both on air. I have done this show for quite a while. I've got other shows that I host as well. This is the first time ever where we recorded a show last week. Something went wrong with the recording, and the show was unusable. So we are redoing it this week. If you notice that there wasn't a show last week, that is why. Thank you guys so much for being understanding and coming back this week.
Of course.
2 weeks ago, though, on my show, I was joined with Kevin Coleman and Nick Scripp, and we were talking about ambiguous backfields. Today, I'm with Chris Meaney, Adam Pfeifer, and we're going to be talking about ambiguous wide receiver rooms. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first? You're the host of Mean Streets over at FTN. They can find you, I believe, 5 days a week, right?
Yeah, 5 days a week. I had the pleasure of chatting up with you yet again, just like last year. I think I gave you the short end of the stick previewing a brutal football team and the Atlanta Falcons. We talked mostly about your Bears, though. Yeah, it was the Falcons. We really wasn't much a whole lot to say, really. Tyler Algier, great. Kyle Pitts, real good at the game of football, and that's really all you need to know when it comes to the Falcons. But yeah, it's 5 days a week. Cover a lot of sports over at FTN. Of course, NHL and NBA season are over, but we cover those. A little bit of PGA, MLB season in full swing here, and of course, we're getting closer and closer to NFL football. So it is really here 5 days a week over at Game Plus Network at 3 Eastern, and stream it live from our FTN Network YouTube page at 12. A couple different shows happening, one with myself and Eric Young, a football one twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Tuesdays, we'll go over, the week that was, kind of hit the waiver wire. And then on Thursdays, we'll dive into some props and some picks. It's more of a fantasy-friendly show in the first part of the week. And then towards the end of the week, a little bit of an NFL betting show. And we have some MLB betting show or NFL betting show. We do have some MLB betting shows over at FTN as well. So a lot happening. Really excited with all the things that we're doing over at FTN, and I'm sure Pfeiffer's going to talk about that as well because he's got his handprints all over FTN these days.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that, Chris and Adam. Yeah, same over to you. Hosting DataCast over at FTN. You guys are both staying so busy. It seems like every time I log into Twitter, I'm seeing a video or a tweet, something you guys have come out with lately. And it's that time of year where we are just cranking out content less than a month away from the NFL kickoff. But Adam, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, what you're working on right now, and where they can find the DataCast podcast.
Yeah. And like Meaney said, like Dave, you've made the rounds. You were on the DataCast last week. That can be found, iTunes, Spotify, all platforms for podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at apfeifer24. The 24, of course, is for the greatest baseball player of all time. That'd be Ken Griffey Jr.
Baby,
you see this, Adam?
I did.
My head.
We talked about it.
Himself. Yep.
Yeah, we talked about it. So, and yeah, I'm doing the DataCast. I also launched a couple weeks ago. Jeremy Popolars and I are doing once a week. We're doing a Dynasty podcast over at FTN, so that's fun. And yeah, I'm just doing a bunch of articles for football. It's going to be really fun. And then sooner or later, I'm going to look at the calendar, and it's going to be October, and I'll be doing basketball as well. So it's an exciting time.
It certainly is. And I mean, things are just changing so fast. Like I said, we recorded this last week, re-recording it now. And in that time, Tim Patrick is out for the year. Julio Jones is a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And one other thing I want to talk about is Isaiah McKenzie. We don't want to put too much weight into camp hype, but from every report we've been getting out of Buffalo, Isaiah McKenzie has been tearing it up. So this next room that we're going to talk about, wide receivers, it's a little bit broad. We're not talking about two guys that are going back-to-back in ADP like the Los Angeles Chargers, but right now it seems like people are really putting their chips on Gabe Davis to be the guy in Buffalo. He is getting drafted as a wide receiver 24. You can get Jamison Crowder a little bit later, wide receiver 68, who just showed back up to practice this week, but has been dealing with some injuries and riding the bike off on the sideline. And then we've got Isaiah McKenzie getting drafted as wide receiver 99, who a lot of people are saying could be locked into that slot role. So, Adam, start us off here between these three guys, Gabe Davis, Jamison Crowder, Isaiah McKenzie. Who do you prefer at ADP and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's still Gabe Davis for me. It's so funny talking about Gabriel Davis in terms of average draft position because over on like Underdog, he's going, borderline top 22 receiver. And then in traditional 12-team redraft leagues, he's going to be going like the 6th or 7th round. I still firmly believe in a breakout season. Yes, the postseason game against the Chiefs was amazing. He won't do that again, obviously. But it's more than that. It's what happened once the Bills finally decided to make him a full-time receiver starting in week 14. From week 14 on, he was like the wide receiver 22 in fantasy. Again, not a massive sample size, but he was finally playing close to an every down role, which he's going to play this season. You look at his career in games where he's seen at least 5 targets, he's averaging right over 14 fantasy points per game. He's been top 12 in end zone targets both of his first 2 seasons, despite not being a full-time player. He's been like 71 and 40% of the snaps during those 2 seasons. So, and during that span, like Stephon Diggs has been at 32, I believe it is, in terms of end zone targets, but Gabe Davis is at 23, again, in way less playing time. So he's like McKenzie's been getting a lot of hype, but Gabriel Davis has been amazing in camp too. He's literally been, he didn't even like go on vacation or anything this offseason. He's been working out the entire offseason. I just obviously watched him closely through his first 2 seasons. I'm a massive believer in the talent and the offense. But having said that, like, yeah, Isaiah McKenzie's hype has gotten up there. We've seen him in that game against the Patriots where he was thrust into a larger role really play well, especially against a man-heavy team like the Patriots. So, and yeah, like McKenzie's a veteran and he's obviously missed time and, with some injuries, but like McKenzie knows this offense. He's been there for a couple of years. He's 27. He's been around. So, I think the McKenzie hype is real. I wouldn't go too far with it, but, yeah, Gabe Davis is going to be pretty easily, in my opinion, the wide receiver 2 behind Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, and you say don't go too crazy with it. I know all 3 of us are doing a lot of best ball drafts this time of year, and I'm seeing Isaiah McKenzie. I mean, that hype is real. He is starting
him and
to
Romeo
slide
Doubs
into,
are like flying up.
Oh man, there's another guy, yeah.
Especially, yeah, with Christian Watson now sitting out on the sidelines in camp. People are going crazy about Doubs. And yeah, I mean, you got to pay up for those guys. I've seen Doubs, however you want to say it. I've seen him going as early as the 12th or 13th round. I saw Isaiah McKenzie get drafted in the 10th round the other day.
That's absurd.
It's kind of funny. We spend all offseason like just hammering down our process and getting our ranks nice and tight and all that. And then you see one clip of somebody just beating somebody in camp, and you're just like, all right, well, I'm going to slide this guy up three rounds in my rankings. And that's where Isaiah McKenzie is right now. But Chris, I want to get your thoughts a little bit on this Buffalo wide receiver room. Do you think it's best to pay up for Gabe Davis, or do you think that there's value to be found with Jamison Crowder, Isaiah McKenzie, or maybe one of these late round guys?
I still think there's value on McKenzie. Yeah, just to kind of put into perspective, I mean, 2 months ago, I saw his ADP over at Underdog around 312. And now I'm looking, mid two, like 240, 250 kind of on average here over the last 4 weeks. I'm looking at NFFC high stakes leagues. He's, wide receiver 79 over the last 4 weeks. It's an ADP of like 210. So he's really jumped up like 100 draft spots here over the past, few weeks. Of course, these things happen. We're all following social media and camps, and people get excited about, just about everything. So it's nice that Josh Allen actually has that rapport with him, as Adam alluded to towards the end of last season, and there seems to be a role. 2 months ago, I would have said Crowder. I would have said that Crowder's certainly worth a flyer, and I think that he is. He's now his ADP is kind of headed the opposite direction of McKenzie. I think that the Bills probably give him the benefit of the doubt, to start the season as like more snaps in the slot. He's experienced. It's just health has always, been an issue with him. But, he's had moments when he was with the Jets, even though there was some bad quarterback play there, he's great. And, at times with Kirk Cousins in Washington, there was one season where he was top 4 in the league in end zone targets. So he was a big part of their offense at that moment. But that seems like a long, long time ago. So those guys you're really just taking flyers on them. I think in a standard 12-team league with your buddies, McKenzie may not even get drafted. Crowder may not even get drafted either. But Josh Allen's QB1. Probably the best offense in football. We're going to be one of them for sure. I think where Gabe Davis is going, it's fine. There's a couple guys in around that range I'd probably rather have, like maybe Rashad Bateman, Maybe even Judy in around that spot. But what Adam said too, I mean, it's just, to me, this time last year, I made a bold prediction on Mean Streets, Dave, and I said he'd be a top 15 wide receiver. I was completely wrong about that, but he finished off his rookie season really strong. He had 4 TDs in his last 6 games. He seemed to have Allen's trust inside the end zone and the red zone. And then we definitely saw it towards the end of last season as well. 4 TDs last 5, then 5 and 2 playoff games, had the big monster game. This time last year, cheap dynasty buy. Maybe a little bit too bullish on him. Now everybody is certainly in on him, and you have to pay the price. So mid-20s. Adam also said, depending on whatever site, is again a reference to the mock draft we're doing at FTN. I think I took him as like my 3rd wide receiver outside the top 30 at the position. So I mean, if you can get him there, I think that's really, really good value. And again, linked to Allen, is the upside's tremendous for him, and I think he's only going to grow as a player.
Yeah, and you talked about his dynasty value, and it's kind of weird with Gabe Davis because when you look at in different formats, he's valued so differently. Like if you want him in best ball, you're paying up here. Like you're paying a top 20 wide receiver price
for
tag
sure
in best ball because everyone wants that stack with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, and even if people are drafting Bengals players earlier, they want that week 17 correlation in the tournament. So that's really propping up his value. In redraft, you can still get him at a pretty reasonable cost. He's going as like a wide receiver 3, which I think he should be getting drafted. Mm-hmm. And then for whatever reason in dynasty, he is dirt cheap. Like the dynasty community has not warmed up to Gabe Davis.
It's a draft capital, 4th round, but like
exactly, yeah. And people are willing to take a chance on like a 1-year thing, but long term, nobody wants to buy into Gabe Davis. So the way I think about it, like if you're drafting him in best ball and you're drafting him in redraft, you're a believer that he's going to step up. So go out and trade. You can get Gabe Davis right now in dynasty for a late 2nd, early 3rd round pick, and people won't even bat an eye. But then if you're drafting him in a single redraft or best ball league, you really got to pay up for him. So I don't want to get into dynasty too much this time of year because the season's about to start and that's more off-season stuff. But if you're in a dynasty league and you're a believer in Gabe Davis, go out and make a trade for him. The one thing I'll say though with the slot receivers, and Adam, I'll just throw this to you one more time and then we'll move on to a new team. I know you're very plugged in with the Bills camp. I've been beating the drum for Jamison Crowder all offseason. Just see an older veteran just stepping into Cole Beasley's role. I was just projecting 100+ targets. Expecting the top 30 finish. Am I off track? I mean, should I back off on that now? Because I'm not too proud to admit when I'm wrong, and it's certainly starting to feel that I'm wrong, even though we're only a week and a half into camp.
So I don't think you should just completely call it because, like, again, he's a veteran receiver that's been dealing with some soreness, and he hasn't been practicing much. McKenzie's obviously looked great, but like the thing I'm interested with Buffalo is they bring in OJ Howard. This has been a team that's run 3 wide as much as anybody in football the last couple seasons under Brian Daboll. I wonder if they go more 2 tight end sets with OJ Howard, which would mean we see strictly Diggs and Davis on the outside. So that was something I was always interested in terms of Jamison Crowder this year anyway. But no, like it's way too early, man. Like Crowder could be back practicing, and one practice session he's going to have a really nice rapport with Josh Allen, and things are going to change. So they brought him in to replace Cole Beasley. They also did obviously re-sign Isaiah McKenzie, who they could have let go in free agency. But no, I think it's way too early. By the way, before we move on, I clearly am a huge Bills fan. I rewatched the end of the Bills-Chiefs game last night. I am an idiot.
Why would you do that?
I am so stupid for that.
Yikes, that's rough.
I don't know if I've ever watched a better football game in my life. I think the only game I could ever remember watching live that may have held up to that was Deshaun Jackson running back the kickoff against the Giants as the clock expired.
That was the best.
That's the only time I could ever remember watching a non-Bears game where I was like standing up off my couch, like screaming at the TV. That was just a fantastic game. And
Mike Vick's season, that was an unbelievable comeback.
Yeah, that was a great game. And with Deshaun Jackson too, just the way he like ran down the whole width of the field just to run out the clock. I mean, just fun stuff there. But the one guy we didn't even talk about getting all the slot snaps that should see a decent amount in Buffalo is James Cook. So I mean, there's a chance realistically that this slot role in Buffalo is more of a committee where you see some Isaiah McKenzie, some Jamison Crowder, some James Cook, and that can end up being a little bit frustrating for fantasy managers. But we've spent a ton of time talking on Buffalo. Let's move on to the Denver Broncos. And this has been shaken up a ton. When we recorded this last week, we talked a bunch about how much we all love Tim Patrick. And unfortunately, Tim Patrick tore his ACL and he's out for the season. So now we're looking at Courtland Sutton, wide receiver 20, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 28. I expect to see both of these start to creep up a little bit. Chris, at the current ADPs, though, Courtland Sutton, wide receiver 20, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 28, who do you prefer?
I prefer Sutton. I think Sutton can kind of take that Tyler Lockett role, but I do agree with you. I think both guys, will jump up a little bit. And, like we talked about with the Chargers and those two wide receivers, I think certainly Russell Wilson can support both of these guys as well. I wouldn't be shocked if they were both strong wide receiver twos. I mean, Sutton, using some of our tools over at FTN data, is seventh in deep targets last year. That's targets of at least 20 yards. He is the high ADOT guy inside this offense. I know that Nathaniel Hackett is coming over, but I don't expect that to change too much. 17 targets of at least 20 yards and fifth in deep target percentage, 16%. So, and Russ just happened to lead the NFL in passes of at least 20 yards last year, 76, actually tied with Pfeiffer's boy, Josh Allen, but Russ only played 14 games. That's 19% of his passes, 20 yards, at least 20 yards down the field, also led the league. And that's very similar to Lockett last year. Lockett is right there with Sutton in terms of percentage of targets of at least 20 yards and how he was used. So I just feel like it's a perfect match for these two. It's unfortunate with Tim Patrick because, my goodness, when we chatted, it all seemed like we were really in on Tim Patrick. I know he was jumping up draft boards, but still finished as a top 45 wide receiver last year with really nothing at the quarterback position. He led the Broncos in end zone targets last year with 8. Judy had 0, and Sutton had 7. So they're going to need to figure something out. I don't know if KJ Hamler goes into the slot now and Judy goes on the outside, or if they're into, bringing in a veteran like, I don't know, Will Fuller or something that they could put on the outside. But I'm in on Sutton. I think he has upside to be a really strong wide receiver too. And, we haven't seen a whole lot from Judy. We've seen spurts, not really heavily used inside the red zone in each of his first 2 seasons. But again, the quarterback play has been bad. He suffered that injury, where it looked like he was going. And then I believe it was an ankle injury that he suffered. And that kind of held him back a bit. But man, Russell Wilson has supported 2 wide receivers for years. He can do that here inside this offense. I'm really excited about both of these guys. But give me Sutton. Give me Sutton at cost.
And I don't want to say I was fading Judy, but I was a little bit lower than him on the consensus, so I didn't have him in a ton of my drafts, and that was 100% because of Tim Patrick. I thought Tim Patrick was going to have a huge role, but now we're looking at these two guys, and you already talked about KJ Hamler's health a little bit. This kind of similar to like what you were saying earlier about the Chargers. I kind of feel like the answer to Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton at this point might just be both. Like you said, I mean, Russell Wilson has a history of supporting even before DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, just consistently supporting 2 high-end wide receivers. So we could see that again this year. But Adam, over to you, talking about Denver a little bit. How do you prefer these wide receivers at ADP?
Yeah, I've been really high on Sutton the entire offseason. I've kind of talked about how I think he's in the Tyler Lockett position, where you look at where his targets came last season in Denver. 14.3% of his targets came from the deep left portion of the field, which is where Tyler Lockett was in Seattle. That was the 10th highest rate in the NFL for Sutton. Russell Wilson, 13.4% of his pass attempts went to that part of the field last year. That was the highest rate in the NFL. So I think where those two players align, and that's according to our advanced passing direction numbers at FTN Fantasy, I think they're going to be there's already reports where they have been just really tearing it up and developing a nice rapport. And now with Tim Patrick, unfortunately, out, like, Sutton has a clear path to end zone targets because, like Meaney said, Patrick was a really underrated end zone target the last couple seasons with the Broncos. So I'm not moving Sutton up because I was already so high on him anyway, but this does give him a better chance of seeing, 12, 13, 14, even end zone targets, especially because Wilson's been top 5 in end zone throws pretty much every healthy season he's been playing in the last handful of seasons. And it's not like he throws to the running backs in close. So, I love Sutton still. Judy, it's interesting because is he going to play out wide more now, where you would primarily prefer him in the slot, but like they aren't going to put KJ Hamler on the outside. So I think overall Judy's playing time is going to be a lot higher because 2 wide receiver sets, he'll be in there. There was going to be a lot of 2 wide sets where it was Patrick and Sutton. So I'll probably move Judy up a little bit. And now, I mean, KJ Hamler cleared, activated off the PUP list. So looking healthy, and he obviously can take the top off of defense with his crazy speed too. So, like Tim Patrick injury it was really unfortunate because I was really high in the player, really high in the situation, but it's opening up an opportunity for KJ Hamler and a more secured role for Sutton and Judy.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you heard what Patrick Surtain said yesterday, but he was hyping up KJ Hamler in a big way. He said, there's a lot of guys that have 4.2 speed. He goes, but this guy actually runs a 4.2 on the field. And he said he's at his full speed 2 strides into his run. He said it's almost impossible to keep up with him. So gotta love hearing that KJ Hamler is coming back. He's another guy that late in your drafts really like throwing some late round dart throws at. But let's stick with, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. We're talking about Russell Wilson's receivers this year. Let's talk about the wide receivers that have been supported as wide receiver ones for the last few seasons. And now we don't even know who their quarterback is going to be. It might be Drew Lock, might be Geno Smith, might be Jimmy Garoppolo. Who knows what is going on in Seattle? But let's talk about DK Metcalf currently getting drafted as the wide receiver 19 and Tyler Lockett currently getting drafted as wide receiver 38. Now, this is Footballguys ADP right now, so there's a lot of redraft in here. For whatever reason, DK Metcalf in best ball is getting drafted way lower than that. Last I checked, he was wide receiver 26, getting drafted as a wide receiver 3. Seems like people are really cooling off on DK Metcalf without Russell Wilson. Adam, start us off here, though. Between DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett at their current ADPs, who do you like?
Yeah, it's still Metcalf for me. The splits with Geno Smith last year, obviously, they were still fine. A lot of it was touchdown dependent, but like, who's to say that he doesn't score touchdowns this season on a team that doesn't have a lot of end zone targets? And they're still going to want to run the football, obviously. But for me, like, it also comes down to the receivers, surprisingly, where Lockett goes. I still like a lot of the receivers that go around him. It's like Kadarius Toney, Allen Lazard. Like, there's a lot of receivers in that range, whereas Metcalf, yes, there's obviously still plenty of receivers, but, like, he just got the extension. He's still an incredible talent. Lockett is as well. But for me, like, with numbers and everything, I love talking about advanced stats and correlation and stuff like that. But the connection that Wilson and Lockett had, it was probably the second best in the league outside of Rodgers and Adams. And you could throw Brady and Gronk in there too, I guess. But like the way he just looks up and Russ Wilson just drops that rainbow ball down there and it just right into Lockett's arms, like that's not going to be the same. We saw his splits were terrible with Geno Smith. He had one really good game against Jacksonville, then the rest, he wasn't even like, you couldn't even consider starting him. So for me, like, I think not having the deep ball chemistry and connection with Russell Wilson is going to impact Lockett a lot more than Metcalf.
Yeah, and I, the only thing I'll push back a little bit is Tyler Lockett. He was doing that even if Russ was his quarterback.
Lockett's incredible.
Yeah, but whether it was Russ or Geno Smith at QB, that's just kind of what you expect from Russell Wilson or from Tyler Lockett is a handful of dud weeks and then 1 week where he puts up 30 or 85 points.
Very boomer bust.
That's just how.
But are the boom weeks 35 now or are they 15? That's the question.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, we might not be looking at any 180-yard 3 touchdown games from Geno Smith, let alone from Tyler Lockett.
That's the other thing too. Russell Wilson would have he's been in a low passing volume offense his entire career, but Russell Wilson could have 323 on 26 passing attempts because he's literally been the most efficient quarterback in football since he's entered the league. Like that's not going to happen again. Like that's not like Russell Wilson being gone is massive for that. So if there's still a low volume passing offense, which they definitely will be, like you would need like 40 pass attempts from Drew Lock or whoever to even get 300 probably. Not every time, but it's just not going to be the same as Russell Wilson.
That's a great way to look at it too, and something I haven't really thought about that much, but that is going to be a run-first team and able to support a passing attack because of Russ Wilson's insane efficiency, which is obviously going to be gone this year. But Chris, same question over to you. DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett?
Yeah, the Seahawks can say they want to be run heavy all they want, but
they will.
Honest, this team is gonna. Yeah, sure. Pete Carroll's gonna find a way, but yeah, we were down 3 scores in the fourth quarter. We really just wanted to get another look at Rashad Penny, carrying, between the tackles. Yeah, I think we could just look at what we talked about earlier with Sutton and Lockett, kind of use the same sort of way. Like Lockett was first in deep target percentage, and we talked about Russell Wilson, how accurate of a quarterback he is, and how he was used, and how Sutton was used last year and his high A dot, and it didn't really work out with him well with Drew Lock under center. There was just like not an accurate quarterback. So here we go. We put Drew Lock in this offense with Lockett. What's going to happen with Tyler Lockett? I do believe Geno Smith is going to get the benefit of the doubt. I think he played well enough in those 4 games, and he knows the playbook to open up as the starter. I don't think Drew Lock is going to, blow the cover off he's not going to stand out, I don't think, throughout camp where Seattle's like, all right, that's it. You got the job. You are starting week 1 for us, but it's a very, very small sample size. But I was looking at some of our splits tools over at FTN. So 4 games is the sample. And for Lockett with Geno, he actually averaged more targets, more catches. 8.25 targets compared to 6 with Russ in 12 games, and 5.2 catches compared to 4.33. But he just wasn't efficient with those targets, right? There was one game where he kind of blew up. He had double-digit catches, and I think he hit the century mark through the air. But he had 0 touchdowns in those games. He had 15 fewer yards per game overall. He had 11.4 fantasy points, 4.9 fewer fantasy points with Geno than with Russ. But DK was pretty consistent with the 4 games. Now, he had 5.7 targets per game compared to 8.1 with Russ, but he had more catches, 4.6 compared to 4.3. He had 51 more yards, he had 22 more yards per game. 73 is what he averaged, and just 51 with Russ. He had 1.2 touchdowns. He had the 5 touchdowns in the 4 games with Geno, and he had 6.8 more fantasy points per game with Geno than Russ. In a full point, a half point, your old school standard format he did. Again, it's a very, very small sample size, but I think with Lockett, you have to have more of that finesse throw. We did, Pfeifer talked about that connection that they had for years, the accuracy from Russ that I just don't feel will be there with Geno. And you mentioned, Dave, too. It's been years, right? People kind of always say, okay, Lockett falls down draft boards a little bit. Very boom or bust. Consistency isn't there. But at the end of the day, because of those big boom weeks, he shows up as a solid wide receiver too. But I don't know how consistent those boom weeks will be, where DK just showed me a little bit more consistency, more efficient, end zone guy. Throws were kind of like short A dot, kind of more on point. But honestly, to wrap up, I like a lot of guys in around their ranges, 19. We just talked about Cortland Sutton. You got to make that decision. Cortland Sutton, Allen Robinson, Brennan Cooks, who's been a top 20 wide receiver in each of the last 2 years. Tyler Lockett's going around Tony, which Adam mentioned. I just seem to tap Tony and Lazard and Robert Woods like almost every time in around that range. Sky Moore is jumping up there as well. So I don't know how many shares I'll have of these guys. I think they'll both fall because of the quarterback play, and it could create some opportunity, but I would rather have DK than Lockett.
Yeah, I'm gonna lose sleep over Tyler Lockett or Sky Moore. I am looking at that in almost every single one of my drafts. I'm on the clock in that round, and I'm looking at Sky Moore or Tyler Lockett, and it's just so tough to make a decision between those two. But like you said, obviously DK Metcalf saw a little change in usage, but Tyler Lockett relies so much on the finesse and the timing routes that Russell Wilson was great with. It makes sense that if you're a Drew Lock, it's going to be so much easier to just chuck it up to the behemoth that is, whether he's covered, it doesn't matter. This guy's 6'3", he can jump out of the freaking stadium. So it makes sense they're just going to throw it up and let him do his thing rather than trying to work on those timing routes with Lockett. So, I'm with you. I like DK a little bit more. And it's no disrespect to Tyler Lockett. I just think that the QB change is going to negatively impact him much more than it will impact DK. That being said, if Jimmy Garoppolo lands in Seattle for whatever reason, Jimmy Garoppolo so good on those short to intermediate parts of the field, and that's where Tyler Lockett really does a lot of his route running. So I can see that helping a little bit if he gets there, but I just don't like the Tyler Lockett match with Geno Smith or Drew Lock. Now let's talk about Cincinnati, because this is one where both of these guys right now are being drafted as wide receiver 1s. Ja'Marr Chase is going in the first round as wide receiver 3. It seems like he never makes it past pick 5. That's exactly where he's going. You got the top 4 of Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Cooper Kupp, and Justin Jefferson. And then it seems like Ja'Marr Chase is locked into that 5 spot. And then at the 2-3 turn, that's when you typically see T. Higgins go as wide receiver 11. So Chris, start us off here. Do you prefer paying up for Ja'Marr Chase, or do you like just waiting and getting T. Higgins?
I think I like waiting and getting T. Higgins. It's nothing really against Chase. I don't feel like, from a target standpoint, these guys I think they're going to be pretty similar. I think, Burrow's first read will probably be Ja'Marr Chase. And, he tore the cover off a lot of defenses talking about, deep targets and end zone targets. He checked a lot of boxes in those situations, but, in around that range, I don't know. I'm a little I have a little bit of a pause when he goes as the second wide receiver off the board. And I've seen I feel like Justin Jefferson is headed for more targets. It seems to be a debate between both guys. Who would you rather have, Chase or Jefferson? But give me Jefferson. Give me that guy who I know is certainly the alpha one, is going to get all those targets. And where T. Higgins is going, right around wide receiver 10 or 11. I mean, I would not be shocked if they both played a similar amount of games and T. Higgins is the guy who actually finished ahead of Ja'Marr Chase. I think there's certainly a higher ceiling With Chase, he's extremely explosive. I expect like more bubble screens with him and just watching him, take off, because he surprised a lot of defenses last year with some deep targets, and he was getting behind defenses. I don't know if that will be the case. So I like both of these guys. Love Burrow. Passing attempts are going to be up. They've really kind of took the training wheels off of him towards the end of the second season, coming back from that knee injury. At first, it wasn't so much pass. He saw a little bit more of what we saw in his rookie season with Zach Taylor calling the shots, and he's progressing as a play caller too. But man, it's tough. I think Jamar Chase is certainly the better player, but I will side with T. Higgins here, and a little bit of value there for end of second, maybe third.
How about it? We can finally say Zach Taylor is a decent play caller. Like 2 years ago,
I think
the
he
entire
is.
NFL fan base was calling for his head, and then he takes his team to the Super Bowl, and now all of a sudden people are really warmed up to Zach Taylor.
I mean, he learned from Sean McVay in LA. It was going to take some time, so you don't see a lot of rookie coaches, bring their teams to the playoffs, and just like that, brought a team that was the worst team in football a couple of years ago to the Super Bowl. So I think he deserves some credit.
I think it was just because of him toying around with the Joe Mixon injury, never giving anyone any sort of clear idea. I think that's why everybody soured on Zach Taylor. But yeah,
he's still day to day, actually. To this day,
yeah,
he's still day to day.
Yeah, he will retire being day to day on the injury report. But same over to you, Pfeifer. Do you like paying up for Jamar Chase, or do you think T. Higgins could put up similar production at a much cheaper price?
So I absolutely love T. Higgins. I actually wanted the Bills to draft him, but that was the year they traded for Stephon Diggs.
Can't be mad about
that. I'm still fine with Jamar Chase in the first round, but yeah, like T. Higgins actually averaged more targets per game than Jamar Chase. Not by a lot, but he averaged more targets per game. I would probably lean as well T. Higgins. But can we give Tyler Boyd some love, please? Because Tyler Boyd's legitimately one of my favorite receivers to draft. Meaney kind of alluded to the fact that the Bengals started the season off so run heavy. They were really easing Joe Burrow back from his injury in 2020. And then the second half of the season, they started to really throw the football. And that's when you could finally see all three receivers be really good in fantasy. Like the start of the season, they were in weeks 1 to 8, they had the 11th lowest pass rate in the NFL. But then from weeks 9 to 17, the Bengals rested their starters in week 18, so we're not counting week 18. Boyd was the wide receiver 27 in fantasy. The Bengals climbed to 12th overall in passing rate. During that same span, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are also both top 15 receivers, I believe. So, if they continue to throw at the rate they did the second half of last season, Tyler Boyd is going to crush his ADP of wide receiver 50. So just wanted to shout out that Tyler Boyd's one of my most drafted receivers as well. So don't sleep on him. But yeah, in terms of where they're all going and the upside they present, the other thing with the Bengals is they were actually, because they had so many huge long passing plays of 50 plus yards and 60 yards, they were actually fourth. They were fourth fewest plays per drive in the NFL. You wouldn't think that because they're such a high powered offense. And they were, I think, 17th in red zone scoring attempts per game. So if the huge passing plays and the huge long plays come back down to earth and they sustain more drives and get in the red zone more, that could probably benefit T. Higgins, who I think would be 1A or 1B at least in terms of end zone targets. So I still think there's a double-digit touchdown season on the horizon for T. Higgins. So I'm absolutely, I love him. I still think Chase is well deserving of a first-round selection. But yeah, give me T. Higgins. And then give me Boyd at wide receiver 50 every single time.
I agree on Boyd. Plus, Dave, the offensive line is better in Cincy, too. They've addressed that over the past couple of seasons, and I think they did a good job through free agency in the draft as well.
Yeah, and like Adam said, this team started throwing a little bit more as the season progressed. So, T. Higgins put up a great season. Joe Burrow did. Joe Mixon did. Jamar Chase, all of these guys put up great seasons last year, but there's still so much meat on the bone. Joe Burrow came back from a very traumatic knee injury, and he was not himself week 1. It took him a few weeks to kind of get back up to speed, but that team was cooking at the end of the season. So, I'm really excited to see what they can do. I just wrote an article on Jamar Chase, so I'm gonna side with him a little bit because Jamar Chase was a guy that I thought there was a lot of risk baked into Jamar Chase with a top 5 ADP. I just thought that was kind of crazy looking at how many of his points came off of big plays last year and how many touchdowns he scored. And the more I dug into it, looking at some historical trends, I basically realized that Jamar Chase is a lot safer than you think he is, even if he gets slapped with insane regression. His touchdowns go down, his big plays go down. A player of his caliber, somebody who was drafted with his draft capital, put up the numbers that he did as a rookie, on average sees a 28% increase in targets going into year 2. So I think what you got to look at with Jamar Chase is even if, which I don't expect it to drop off that much, but even if his production and efficiency falls off a cliff, the bump in usage should help maintain his value a little bit. So pretty much what I'm looking at with Jamar Chase, like worst case scenario, he's going to be a low end wide receiver 1. Best case scenario, he's going to put up one of the best seasons in fantasy football history. Yeah. But as much as I love Jamar Chase, it was also mind blowing when I dug into this that T. Higgins, like you said, Chris, saw more targets per game, better target rate, more yards per route run. I mean, it's crazy how similar their usage and efficiency metrics are. Where the big difference is Chase had double the touchdown rate and twice as many yards per catch. So, he's a great athlete, and that's not going to change. But, I love both of these guys.
I was going to say, I'm perfectly fine drafting both, too. Like,
Yeah. You remember the combo? Yeah, for sure. Give me them all. Remember the combo this time last year? Jamar Chase can't catch. He can't catch a football. He doesn't know how to catch. He was going like wide receiver 27, 28 outside the top 30. How crazy that was. Blown out of proportion. This guy couldn't catch, and he talked about the football being different. But meanwhile, Burrow was coming back from the knee surgery, and they were practicing with like Brandon Allen, and everyone's like, "Oh, we can't catch Brandon Allen's like fastball." Well, like, what the heck are we even talking about here? And now we're talking about him being like a lock and loaded top 5 wide receiver. So,
and 2 years ago, Justin Jefferson was losing reps to BC Johnson, and this year, Treylon Burks is out of shape and struggling with his asthma. I'm just saying, I'm buying the dip on Treylon Burks too.
Yeah, I hear
Let's go ahead. There's 2 other teams I want to talk about, and first of all, and both of these teams saw a huge shakeup this year with a big trade for a wide receiver. And first of all, I want to talk about Philly. Right now, AJ Brown is getting drafted as the wide receiver 10. Devonta Smith sliding all the way to wide receiver 34. I've got some very strong opinions on this wide receiver room, but before I get to that, Adam, the floor is yours. Talk to me a little bit about these Philadelphia Eagles and what you're expecting from A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith.
Yeah, this is another scenario where I'm perfectly fine with both. I probably have A.J. Brown a little bit lower than consensus. He's more of like a receiver I would love as my number 2 than my 1. But yeah, like the Eagles' passing rate, right? Last year they were so pass heavy, and then Shane Steichen took over the offensive play calling duties some point in the second half of the season, and they were the most run heavy team in the league. I don't think that the Eagles are going to be as run heavy as they were in the second half or as pass heavy as they were in the first half. I think they're going to be somewhere in between, especially like you're not going to trade for AJ Brown and then immediately extend him and not throw the football. But like after doing some writing about the Eagles, like the fact that they added AJ Brown and some other receivers, like this could help Devonta Smith so much because as a rookie, like what were all the concerns about Devonta Smith? Is he going to be able to get off press coverage on the outside, which he did, and he can because he's really good. But like now he's going to play in the slot more. He was only in the slot 11.7% of the time last year. That was like the 4th lowest rate among all receivers. Like he barely played inside. Now he's going to play inside a lot more. And there at FTN Fantasy, we have this advanced receiving metric. It's pretty much called creative receptions, which demonstrates receivers' receptions they make that require incredible hands, acrobatic ability, a mixture of a bunch of different traits. And Devonta Smith was second in the NFL, according to our advanced metrics in that, behind Terry McLaurin. So as a rookie, he demonstrated that he can be a really good receiver. Like I think he can be a 1 in this league, but he doesn't have to now with AJ Brown there. So again, like we kind of talked about with Lockett, like some of the receivers that go in that range, Devonta Smith goes in that range. I think I would prefer Devonta Smith. I think the ceiling is obviously AJ Brown. He can, like, if AJ Brown has not had anywhere close to an elite targets per game number in his career, but he's still been amazing because he's so efficient and is so good after the catch. But like, I think both are perfectly fine. But I'm slightly leaning Devonta Smith after some of the usage and numbers I looked at because him playing the slot more could be absolutely fantastic heading into year 2.
Yeah, and I'll just say, come out and say it. You said I think Devonta Smith could be a number 1 in this league. He already showed us last year that he can.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I get so excited about is like this guy was beating top corners on coverage. Like if
Patrick Surtain, that touchdown he had in the back of the end zone against Surtain was ridiculous.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah. And when you look at and granted, the 17 games changes things up a little bit, but that 900-yard benchmark for rookies produces nothing but like all pro level talent. Like if you
and an offense that threw the ball like 18 times a game down the stretch too. Like he wasn't even seeing elite volume by any means.
Yeah. So I love the idea. I mean, I think that he's much better suited to be a wide receiver too. He showed his ability to feast as a wide receiver 1. So now with the defense is taken, I mean, AJ Brown, don't get me wrong, I think that he's fine at ADP. I think that he's valued just where he should be. But Devonta Smith makes for one of my favorite targets, and it seems like he's finally starting to creep up draft boards a little bit. But until he gets into like the 6th round, I'm going to keep drafting Devonta Smith as much as I can. Chris, what do you have to add to this Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver?
I know Meaney loves Devonta Smith. So.
Yeah, I like the birds, right? I like Philly. I mean, he cruised past his season yard prop last year, like 700. What a joke! He had 900 facing top corners, not just Surtain, who's a nice rookie himself, but like he faced top corners every time he went out there, and he passed a lot of tests. He's a terrific route runner. Yeah, he's going to be. I feel like he's going to be open 24/7. Like he's not going to garner the number 1 corner. He's not going to get that type of attention. It's going to be AJ Brown. I'm definitely in on Smith. I like where he's going in drafts. It is going to be a run-first offense, though. Maybe a little bit somewhere in between, like Pfeifer said, but they realize to play to their strengths. Still the best offensive line of football, arguably. We have them ranked number 1 over at FTN using some of our tools. You know, they brought back Jason Kelsey at center for another year, Lane Johnson. Like it's still a really, really strong offensive line. I'm a little concerned about AJ. I know that you came on, Dave, and we talked about him. I think we both have that trio stack in the Scott Fish Bowl. Also have the Denver trio stack as well. Couldn't decide between Sutton and Judy at the time, so just took them both, at the end of the draft or end of one of the rounds. But I think with AJ, it's just he's also leaving a run-first team, but it was like he was really the only guy there. That's it. Like 27% target share if he comes over to Philly, considering what the amount of times that Hurts threw the ball per game, that's like just shy of under 8 targets per game. So I don't know if I feel totally comfortable, locking him as a strong wide receiver 1, as a guy who's just going to get 8 targets per game on a run first offense when we're sitting here talking about Smith being really good on the other side too. And holes are going to open up for Dallas Goedert down the field as well. Don't want to dive into camp too much, but the 2 wide receivers are kind of struggling right now. And I guess that goes to the Eagles secondary is, much improved. You got Slay, who's spending time with Devonta on there. And then you have, Bradbury, who's, spending time with AJ. And then, Goddard's been the guy in training camp who's just been kind of wide open in the middle of the field. But I think ultimately the guy that I want in this offense is Jalen Hurts, who finished 6th in fantasy points per game with his rushing upside and adding a guy like AJ. But you don't make that trade. You don't extend him like Adam did say earlier if you're not going to use him. But where is Smith's going is like wide receiver 40. I think there's like terrific value at that point. I'd feel better if AJ was my number 2 wide receiver, and I just don't feel like that is a situation that could happen unless you're towards the end of the draft and you do like a Diggs and Adams, and then you kind of reach a little bit on AJ, but you do have him as your second wideout.
Yeah, and for as good as Jalen Hurts was last year in fantasy, he still wasn't a great NFL quarterback. I mean, he put up a ton of numbers on the ground and, an elite fantasy football season. But at the end of the day, there still are some question marks about Jalen Hurts. So I almost wonder if they're just going to force him to throw a lot this year just to see what he can do, because they've still got those 2 first-round picks next year, and with C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young and some other really talented quarterbacks coming into the draft, maybe they force Jalen Hurts to throw it a little bit and say, hey, we invested a first-round pick and $100 million in A.J. Brown, and they want to make sure that he's the guy that can utilize him correctly. So I'm not sitting here saying that, Jalen Hurts is on the hot seat by any means, but I think that the team is going to try to see what he can do through the air a little bit more now that they have Hurts, and if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, then they could always pivot next year and use those 2 first-round picks to move up. So still a lot of question marks in Philadelphia. I think the one thing we all agree on, though, is get yourself some Devonta Smith, because he is a great value at his current cost. Now, the other team I want to talk about, almost an identical situation where they had a rookie wide receiver that put up a fantastic season, and then the team went out and traded a first-round pick and gave $100 million to a new wide receiver. And, of course, I'm talking about the Miami Dolphins. Right now, Tyreek Hill is getting drafted as the wide receiver 9. Jalen Waddle is getting drafted as the wide receiver 17. Now, this blows my mind because we just talked about how Devonta Smith was just penalized by fantasy football drafters and pushed all the way down to, almost wide receiver 40 status. Jalen Waddle has not gotten that same treatment. He's still being drafted as a high-end wide receiver too. So, Chris, start us off here. Who do you prefer at this ADP? Is it Tyreek Hill as wide receiver 9, Jalen Waddle as wide receiver 17, neither, both? How do you feel?
Yeah, I kind of lean neither.
It's definitely not Mike Gesicki, I'll tell you that one.
No, it's not. This guy's going to block all the time. Oh, my goodness. Mike McDaniel coming over, right? The offense is going to be similar to San Fran. Like his whole career, he's been with Kyle Shanahan his whole career. You can go back to Atlanta last year with San Fran, Houston sometimes as a quarterback coach, a wide receiver coach. He's really been with Shanahan. So I would expect this offense really to look a lot like Shanahan's offense in years past. And that's getting the ball out quickly and, having these guys really explosive blowing the top off. They're both very, very speedy, but they both finished inside the top 10 in targets last year. 159 for Tyreek, 141 for Waddle, and Tua is a guy that threw the ball like 26 times per game. And they got multiple running backs there. They're going to utilize all those running backs, so it's really tough for me to feel. I'm a little uneasy about this offense and spending that draft pick on Waddle. He was clearly Tua's guy. They're familiar with each other in college. Like, that was really it. That's all he really had. There was multiple games where he had well over 10 targets per game. I just don't know if that's going to happen. I have no problem taking Tyreek here and there. You can make a case for anybody in best ball. You can certainly take that shot on him with that high ceiling that he does have, and I think he still is a game winner, a league changer. He really does have that upside. And we've seen some of it on display with the deep ball. Tyreek is kind of, full of it a little bit when he says the best ball he's ever seen is Tua. He did have a 50% completion rate on passes of at least 20 yards, but he only threw the ball 26 times of at least 20 yards last year. So you take that with a grain of salt. But so far, I've been pretty impressed with some of the throws I've hit on point, but I think I'm just out, guys. Miami, everybody, running backs too. There's too many of them. Take the shot on Tyreek. Definitely don't love the price on Waddle. I think there's other guys I'd rather have, like an Allen Robinson. Just give me an Allen Robinson to a better offense in around that range.
Yeah, and I mean, really, when you're looking at it, it's such a similar situation to Philly. You've got a quarterback who's kind of questionable with what he can do through the air on a team that is presumably going to be run first, and for whatever reason, I just can't understand why Tyreek Hill is getting drafted ahead of A.J. Brown and Jalen Waddle is getting drafted so far ahead of Devonta Smith. It just seems like there's some sort of dissonance there that I'm just not really connecting. But Adam, same question over to you, talking about Miami here. Who do you prefer at cost?
Yeah, well, I think Waddle, it's the fact that he's coming off such a good season. He had an historic rookie season. It scares me because Jalen Waddle is so good, but I've barely drafted him this offseason. It's just like Brandon Cooks, Allen Robinson, so many of these receivers, Cortland Sutton. I would just rather draft over Waddle. I guess I would lean Tyreek, but I'm kind of with you guys. I'm not where they're at in ADP. I'm not thrilled. Jalen Waddle was a volume machine last season, like Meaney said. He was among the top 10 receivers in first read targets. He had a 25% target share. The difference was in college, he had a lot of downfield usage. He had an 11.7 ADOT. In his first season in the NFL, went down to 6.9. So I'm interested to see if teams play that too high safety look against Miami, like they did against Kansas City last season because of Tyreek Hill, or if they won't because Tua is not Patrick Mahomes. And if that's the case, if they don't play as much too high safety, then Tyreek could go back to getting more downfield work because last year he was really in a different role. It was a lot of manufactured shorter targets, and that's why he had a career high in targets last season. Yeah, if I had to choose, I would lean Tyreek Hill as well, but it's a situation where I've just drafted receivers, the Bengals receivers, the Chargers receivers, the Eagles receivers. I'm with you. I've drafted receivers from those teams way more than Miami.
Yeah, and I think we're all kind of on the same page here. As much as it is, or as much fun as it is to kind of push back and disagree with each other, I think we're all pretty much on the same page when it comes to Miami. I don't really understand the ADP of a lot of guys here. We already kind of cracked the joke about Mike Gesicki, but yeah, I mean, he's getting called on as a blocker right now, and people are expecting this to just
which is weird because he literally didn't play in line his first 2 seasons or 3 seasons in the NFL.
He's a slot receiver. It's like asking Danny Amendola to go block in line. I mean, it's just crazy that they're asking Mike Gesicki.
And Miami's going to use the fullback too. They signed Alec Ingold. They're going to use the fullback. They have Cedric Wilson.
What a mess.
Chase Edmonds is actually my favorite player on Miami now all of a sudden, which is insane.
Yeah, and he's a guy that's only had more than 13 carries 4 times in his career. I wouldn't be shocked if Mostert or Michelle had more carries than Edmonds. But yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces in Miami. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, Dave.
Yeah, and we didn't even talk about Sony Michel. I mean, I can't even get into the Miami Dolphins backfield. I came out with a video about the Miami Dolphins backfield in March of this offseason, and here we are now in early August, and we still don't have any more clarity than we did 5 months ago. I mean, Miami could be fun, but it could also kind of be a disaster. And then you look at them losing their first and third round picks next year. All of a sudden, they orchestrated this beautiful rebuild where they could have pivoted off of Tua if they needed to. And now with them losing all this draft capital in the 2023 draft, now their hands are kind of tied. And it's we need Tua to be the guy, or we're going to be looking at a decade of really, really bad football. So it's definitely a lot to be watching in Miami. But Fellas, I want to thank you so much for making the time today and making the time last week. I like to think the show is better than last week, but nobody will ever really know except for three of us. But seriously, before we sign off, Adam, one more time, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, what you're working on, where they can find your podcast, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, appreciate the time. At apfeifer24 on Twitter. I'm doing the FTN Datacast and the FTN Dynasty Football Podcast multiple times a week, and then all my content at FTN Fantasy. Football, obviously insanely excited, but basketball as well. So if you are a huge fan of basketball, that'll be, October will be here very, very soon too. So all the content there, and you can get the podcasts on Apple, Spotify, all that great stuff. So appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. And Chris, same over to you. Social media, podcast, Mean Streets, FTN, let everyone know where they can find everything.
I think the show is better too. I mean, the first one was really good, but it's always great to chop it up with you, Dave. So appreciate the invite, man. Yeah, at Chris Meaney on the Twitter machine. Mean Streets 5 days a week, talking everything. Really some team previews from a betting standpoint, talking ADP, all the same things you're talking about as well with your viewers and your listeners. We have the NFL betting show, which is launched. We're previewing teams again, but we will be with you throughout the entire season. That's on Tuesdays and Thursdays at I believe 1 Eastern. We do Mean Streets every day at 12 Eastern. But yeah, as Adam said, we cover a lot over at FTN, all the sports. If you're into betting, you're into picks, you're into season-long stuff, we got some tools and things like that. So hit us up if you're interested. But yeah, we do appreciate it, Dave. This has been fun. I think I've settled a couple differences. I was on the fence a little bit, but with some players. But I guess the big takeaway is it's Gabe Davis season.
And Devonta Smith season. If there's anything you took away from this show, it's go out and draft those two guys. But thank you so much for taking the time to watch. Anybody that's listening, thank you so much for listening. And I will see you next week. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to YouTube at youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to follow us at youtube.com/footballguys, where you can see this every single week, as well as all of our short videos and all of our other full-length podcasts. That's youtube.com/footballguys. Drop a like if you like this video, or send us a reply and let us know what you think. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.